Greetings, greenhouse people. I'm your host, Bill Calkins with Ball Tech on Demand, and on the agenda today is a topic that's pretty cutting edge, and not necessarily because it's brand new in the world of horticulture, but due to the fact that this type of production is expanding and becoming critical to more and more growers all across North America. And I'm talking about tissue culture. And like you, I'm excited to hear more about this from our guests today, both of whom have tremendous knowledge to share from research and application perspectives. Specifically, they're discussing tissue culture acclimation and the key components to success in ornamental plant production. Joining me today is Deanna Felton, longtime propagation and production manager from Sunbelt Greenhouses in Georgia, and Dr. Nathan Johnke, the Culture Research Manager at Ball Horticultural Company in Chicago. And I know you guys have a lot to say on this topic, so let's get started.
All right. So before we even talk about acclimation, we need to talk about the preparation that you're getting into before receiving your tissue culture. So that involves preparing, inspection, but also the grading process. So take it away with the packing list, the first thing that you should be getting.
So you should when it clears customs, you should be receiving a packing slip. So that packing slip helps you set up what you're going to prepare for to stick. So, and also, we've worked really hard working with the labs to be able to get to know what we've got coming in the container and how many plants are actually in the container. What we found when we started out with this is that the lab just gave you an overall number, and one flask might have 100 plants in it and another one might have 50. So in your planning process, we were working to try to get uniformity. So by knowing what you're getting, you're going to prepare your labor force for that. And then you've got to be able to get your trays ready and your tags and everything and be prepped, and so that when that material arrives, you're ready to stick it. When we're in the growing area, you want to make sure that it's clean and disinfected, as well as in the on your sticking line. And you want to have a good source of humidity. And you can see in the picture here that we have dry fog, and this has made a tremendous improvement in our environment at our greenhouse to have that when we're sticking, and it helps the cutting to be turgid quicker, and helps in the growing environment. We also have that going in our coolers as well.
Yeah, so it's holding, right? You have some holding potential as well when
Yes.
you're putting the product in. So humidity is the key with tissue culture, as we'll see more. So then we have the inspection process. Once you get the material in, once you've confirmed the number of plants and containers you have from your packing list, what are you looking for on those plantlets to determine if they're stickable or not? One thing is contamination, and this is bacterial or fungal growth within the flask on the auger. You see a small amount of that around this plantlet here. If you have a large amount of it overcoming all of the plantlets and you see some breakdown, don't stick. But if it's just superficial, plantlets look good, the growing point's intact, the roots look good, likely this is not going to be a big issue, but something for sure you want to make sure that the lab is aware of. And if you are storing flasks for a time being, you do run the risk for getting more contamination in there, especially if you've broken any of the seals or opened any of the containers. The main thing, though, when we're inspecting is looking for breakdown, checking those roots to make sure they're healthy, and as well as the growing tip, the meristem, the growing point where new leaves are emerging. We can see the vitrified leaf here in the bottom left. This is some delphinium red lark here in the top right with some yellowing on the leaf tips. A lot of this is not always bad. The plantlets can survive. We saw that in the alocasia earlier. As long as the growing tip is intact, the roots look good, these can survive. And a lot of this can be related to post-harvest shipping stress. In the bottom right, you'll see this black agar. That's actually activated charcoal that they've mixed into the agar itself, because some species actually grow better in that, and that's because of the contaminants that certain crops release into the media, and so this inactivates those leachates from the plant. This is a quick video here in the top of something you might see come your way if you're shipping or receiving plants in agar. You know, the shipping process can be brutal, and if the agar is not quite thick enough, or if it's been shaken too much, those can flip over, and that's where you get a lot of this vitrified look. So again, as long as the roots look good and the growing tip looks good, you're going to be okay. But that's definitely a challenge you could run into. All right, so check in. What do we need to be looking for? What do people need to mark off the list?
All right. So when you check in, you need to check, did you receive the number of bags that were on your packing slips or flasks? Is there consistency in the counts within those containers? If they're not, you need to communicate with your supplier and let them know what you've gotten in. And if there are issues, are you short? Did they ship too much? Sometimes that happens. Scheduling and holding. You can hold at least some things in the agar container at least 2 weeks, and that helps you schedule how you're going to do your transplant. Or you can, if it's X agar, you can hold it a few days, and then in your cooler, you're going to have some light set up. You're going to have some dry fog set up, so because you're trying to keep that environment humid as well.
Yeah, I'd say just to echo on that counts thing, when you turn over the flask, you can actually count, you know, if the agar stays there, you can count and get a good read on that. But they should be providing a percentage of overpack to you when the flasks come in. And so you can get a quick count that way. And then with the light intensity, you know, you'll see some research in the next few slides. As long as you're not pitch black and those plants aren't receiving any lights, really there's not an excessive amount of light you can provide, but you should be providing some. And then room temperature is ideal because these were grown at room temperature in the lab. You just don't want them to get excessively hot like you would in a head house or a greenhouse situation. But also, I wouldn't go below 65 because you are likely working with a lot of tropical species and you could induce some chilling injury. Grading, this is one of our most important steps right here. And there's some pictures there, but I'll let you go over those 3 steps of grading.
So at the time of stick, you can see in the picture below where you can get some variability in the size of the plantlet you're getting. So we will, at the time of stick, grade those out and put the smalls with the smalls and the larges with the largest. And you can see in the picture above, it can be dramatically different in the way it grows and the way it affects your crop time a lot. So we do that at the time of stick, and then after they're rooted, then we grade them again. It helps grade them out by size as well. It helps with watering and fertilizing and letting your customer know when your product's going to be ready. We also grade again 2 weeks prior to ship to make sure there aren't any issues and that we're sending a uniform product into our customer. So we actually grade 3 times.
Yep. And I think, you know, as long as we keep going with tissue culture, hopefully that will be less. Maybe we can reduce that a little bit. But in the beginning, if you're working with a lab that you're unfamiliar with, or it's a new crop, it's good to get those eyes on it 3 times, and it will make it more manageable for your growers as well, to keep water under control.
Nathan, we have found that by doing the grading at stick, it has greatly reduced the amount of grading that happens after it's rooted.
Yeah. All of that preparation work in the beginning, the earlier you can do it, the more time and more money you're going to save, right? Because you can also ask yourself at that point, what are you willing to stick? Roots or no roots? So generally, you want to stick things that have roots. Not saying that things without roots aren't going to make it, but crop time is likely going to be delayed and you'll probably have a higher loss percentage with things that don't have roots. Out of spec size, develop the size that you really want to see from the lab and give clear pictures of what you want to receive from the lab. So something like this over here, put some bars on it and say, hey, this is ideal, this is too big, and this is too small. Deanna has said multiple times, 2 mature leaves with an active shoot. We don't want, if you're thinking about sticking those smalls, a good rule of thumb is 2 to 3 weeks more on your crop time if you're going to stick them. And then if you have something that's on the large side, you might be 1 to 2 weeks ahead, and you need to consider some plant growth regulators to control that height. Examples of what not to stick. So hopefully this is a good slide for everybody to reference. Overly calloused material. You might see this, if you're working with unrooted cuttings and you have a really wet propagation environment. This is the same type of thing. If you look at this aglaonema here on the bottom in the middle of the slide, you can see like a thick stem base. You can also see these large roots here. Anytime you get something that looks really corky or thickened at the bottom of the plantlet, that's going to have a really hard time rooting. Those roots aren't going to push out through there. It's a lot of undifferentiated cells. So we want to avoid sticking that stuff. Something that's extremely small in this bottom picture here, that's probably the size of your fingernail, if not even smaller. That's going to be a big challenge to make sure those aren't either overwatered or just completely underwatered. Stuff that's breaking down, we've said multiple times, if it has a good growing tip and good roots, stick it. Stretched beyond saving. You can get stuff that the lab has had to hold on to a little bit longer. And so they could be really stretched, and it's going to be a challenge for it to be stuck and then stay upright in the tray. But one thing to consider is if it is a little bit stretched, say on alocasia, I think is what we've ran into before.
Yes.
Those leaves can be really tall, but then your new leaves are going to develop and that petiole is going to be shorter if you have the right environment. So then you can recover from something that's a little bit too stretched.
I think that depends on what the material is that's stretched.
Right. Yeah. Alocasia, good. Some other things might not be. Stuff with too many shoots. We've said that before. Here's a picture of those clump ficus lyrata. So you can see that this one's probably got 20 different shoots in it. And while rooted, it's not going to produce a nice plant at the end of the day when someone's potting up, where you can see a single stem ficus lyrata right here. Looks really nice. And if someone needs a multi-stemmed container, just plant 3 of those. We're going to get a much more uniform tray. Anything you want to add to that of what they should look out for and not stick?
If it's breaking down in the bag, if you have anything that's really extremely vitrified, you may not want to stick that.
Yeah, totally agree. All right, so the conundrum with roots or no roots. Stick if roots are present. A lot of that does depend on the crop or the age and quality of the plantlet. I've got some delphinium here on the slide. So these are really 2-week-old plantlets after they've been subcultured. You can see a little bit of callus there, but you see nice white stem tissue and also new leaves emerging as well. So I would say that, these are likely going to survive if I can manage the humidity and light well. But then if you look below here, see how thick that is. You can see callus on the bottom of this plantlet. And also these petioles are really stunted, and I'd say they were quite brittle. So if you got something that's really just feels old, it's likely going to have a trouble rooting, especially if it doesn't have any roots to begin with. We have done some work with echinacea, which are notorious for having long roots, and you can actually cut those and stick them, and they will root out much better. Your sticking efficiency is going to be much higher. It does slow you down a little bit to cut all of these, but way easier to stick. So consider that, but do some trials first before you jump way into it. And some crops will handle this much better than others. Echinacea, for example, has more fibrous, thinner roots compared to aglaonema, which are very thick and fleshy.